Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. So very glad you're able to spend some time with us as we roll on to the work week. For some, the first day of the work week, things returning back to normal after our latest battle with Mother Nature. HRM put the winter parking ban on again last night, and I'm got some emails from people questioning that decision. And I, too, am wondering why that decision was made. Now, I understand the need that during and the immediate aftermath of a storm to get as many cars off the street as is possible so that it gives the plow operators that are out on the streets a chance to properly clear the streets and get the streets open to the curb and push those banks back so that when the next storm comes, then we have room to push the snow. I understand that. But a second day after some areas got, 10, maybe 15 centimeters of snow, and for the most part, the snow event had ended very early on yesterday morning. And, on my drive home, most of the streets were cleared when I left the station yesterday, and that was around 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. So it's a necessity for it to happen. We understand the need to do it, but shouldn't there be, and this might be something you want to talk about in the open hour today, but shouldn't there be a broader explanation from HRM when they make this decision on a second consecutive day? Maybe an update on the percentage of streets that are done, and this thing can be broken up into two different zones, right? There's Zone 1, which is everything, and then Zone 2 is a specific set of streets. And the reason why this is raised concerns with some of the listeners to this program and with me is that if you park on the street, and let's face it, there are many people that park on the streets here in HRM, when you have to take your vehicle off the street, it's a pain in the backside for most, and in fact, it costs people money because now some will park their vehicles on lots and have to pay a fee for that, or in parkades or wherever else. So I think that if City Council is listening out there today, or City staff are listening out there, how about an explanation when we have a parking ban? I think the initial parking ban we understand in anticipation of the storm, and during the storm I get it, and the day after the storm I think we all understand that. But a second day when for the most part the streets were clear, at least anecdotally my eyeballs showed me that the streets were clear. But maybe an explanation as to why we need that second ban and why we need to inconvenience people to get their cars off the street might be a little more palatable for people as we roll through the winter here. Story on the wires today from HRM that the city has generated the right word? The city has handed out $25,000 in parking fines over the last three storms. So could that be found money? Could that be a part of HRM's plan to try and help out with the budget? I don't think you budget for parking tickets, at least a winter parking ban tickets. I'm sure that there's a line item somewhere in the operations report, and I can probably dig through it and find it, where they anticipate they're going to get X amount of money from parking fines for meters and those kind of things. But I don't think you can budget for snowstorms, right? And that's $25,000. Is that why we're a little easier to enforce the parking bans on snow days? Is it because it generates revenue? That's why I think it's necessary for us to have some sort of explanation. Well, it seems that Tim Houston's spending habits have resulted in S&P Global lowering our province's debt ratings. Now, for the layman, and I count myself in that group, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and it doesn't really is it concerning to me? I mean, we go from a AA negative to an A plus. It's gobbledygook in my world, but as I understand it, this can cause the cost of borrowing to increase, right? The province says, well, it's It's not on their long term. The bond markets, and it's a complicated calculation, and the bond markets aren't impacted, and some of their long term debt isn't impacted. But S&P Global says that we can expect deficits in budgets for the next 2 years here in Nova Scotia, and that on top of an already $1.3 billion deficit. So one of the major lenders out there is perhaps raising an eyebrow to the spending habits of the province and the spending habits of Tim Houston, and is it going to cost us more to borrow money moving forward? I guess time will tell. And quick programming notes, don't forget that on Thursday at 11 o'clock, Premier Houston will be right here inside this studio with me. So we're going to talk to the Premier for a full hour. He's going to be here to answer some of my questions and hopefully some of your questions as well. We've done this on several occasions, and it's quite a popular segment, and the Premier himself likes doing it. So we're going to do it again on Thursday. That's going to happen at 11 o'clock, so make sure you're by your telephone and by your radio for that. Well, just an awful story out of Truro yesterday. Did you read about this? Word that a 54-year-old woman was hit by a snowplow while cutting through a car dealership lot yesterday. Now, there's not much new information from police on this, other than them to say that the incident happened around 6:30 in the morning. So we know that the light levels would have been not as bright, and it was snowing and blowing snow, and visibility was low. We really don't know what happened. The only thing the police have said is that the lot was being plowed by a private contractor, and that the investigation is ongoing, but it's just an awful, awful story that came out of Truro yesterday. Now, several parents, speaking of the snow, sent me some emails yesterday. If you were listening to the program yesterday, you heard me say that, a delay in classes by HRCE because of the snowstorm yesterday is probably more of a pain in the neck than a full cancellation. And I got several emails yesterday that suggested that. They said that the parents said that it's difficult to deal with a delay of an hour or 2 hours because somebody has to stay home with the kids. You got to get them, they're out of their routines. You have to get them ready for school. You have to get them on the bus. You have to get all of that stuff done. And many of them told me that they just didn't even want to bother with it yesterday and just kept their kids home. So I'm curious as to what you thought if you're a parent out there yesterday with that delay here at HRCE, if it was time well spent, or would it have been better to close school, or what your thoughts are on that. So we will be opening up the telephone lines after 11 o'clock today, and I hope that you join the conversation on that. And nationally, did you hear the story earlier this morning from Jason Kenney? Used to be the Premier of Alberta. He's not happy. Go figure, a politician not happy. And he's not holding back on his disdain for the leadership of the group that are pushing for that referendum in Alberta on separating that province from the rest of Canada. Premier Kenney said that, I'm paraphrasing, I have his quote, and we'll play that as part of the open hour today. But he's said that if you don't like living within a united Canada, then there's lots of border crossings, and you can cross at your own pleasure, essentially telling people that if you don't like it, get out. And then he went on to say that the government of Canada, Mark Carney's government, needs to be more open and more vocal on this allegation that members of the U.S. administration, maybe even in the White House, have had conversations with the leadership group of that's pushing for this referendum in Alberta, and they need to call this out for what Jason Kenney says it is. And that is impacting and affecting and meddling with Canadian elections. That also might be something that you want to talk about today during the open hour. It's very interesting that when Doug Ford released his controversial video with Ronald Reagan, that the President of the United States got kind of upset by that, and said that it was meddling with what could have been a Supreme Court decision at the time, right? Because the Supreme Court was was getting ready to hear the government's arguments on the validity of the tariffs that have been placed on Canada and others through that Emergencies Act, and he got quite upset about the whole thing. And yet, and if these allegations are true, and maybe they are, maybe they aren't, that American officials have had conversations with the leadership group that is pushing for this referendum in Alberta, is that non-interference? David Eby, the premier of BC, called it treasonous. Interesting that Canadians aren't, or at least Canadian leadership is not up in arms over the whole thing. We had an Alberta-based conservative convention on the weekend, and it may have come up, but certainly wasn't one of the headline items in Mr. Poilievre's speech. By the way, who got well over 85% support for him to stay on as leader, and hasn't really had a whole lot to say about Alberta separation. I know he said that people are mad and have the right to do this, and I said that yesterday, that I will never, in any way, shape, or form, until there's no longer breath in my body, support separation from a country, but I do support the right for people to ask for it. It's part of a democracy. It's how it works. All that being said, I'm curious to what your thoughts are on that, and we're going to open up our telephone lines again at 11 o'clock today, and we will have a discussion on that or whatever it is on your mind. The second open hour of the week is set to go in about 45 minutes' time. When we come back, we're going to take our first break here on the program this morning. When we come back, what role should your boss and your boss's boss and the company that you work for have in ending domestic violence? A conversation with a director of Communication and Advocacy at Women's Shelters Canada, Kaitlin Geiger-Bardswich, will be your guest. You're listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. Glad you're here. We're back after the break. Welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Allstrands. Thank you for joining us here on a gray Tuesday as we roll through the work week. We know that we have had a epidemic level of domestic violence here in Nova Scotia. That is a well-known fact. It stretches right across the country. New data showing that 1 in 3 women have experienced some form of domestic violence in their lifetime. But of those who's experiencing domestic violence, only about 82% say it impacts their work performance. As a result, they lose things like promotions and jobs and their references. But employers often only see the symptoms. That's things like missed days and distraction and changes in behavior, without understanding what's really happening behind the scenes. At the end of last month, a new Women's Shelters Canada launched a new campaign to maybe educate employers, to give employers more tools in the toolbox to help combat domestic violence. And we're very pleased to tell us a little bit more about it here is Director of Communications and Advocacy at Women's Shelters Canada. That's Kaitlin Geiger-Bardswich. Kaitlin, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, well, my pleasure. Kaitlin, we know that domestic violence is at a insane level in Canada. We know that it's everywhere, and even here in Nova Scotia, it's been called at an epidemic stage. Everybody kind of has a role to play in combating domestic violence, and this program is trying to educate employers on what their role should be in this, correct?
That's exactly right. So this is to really promote a free training for employers. And the Transition House Association of Nova Scotia, SANS, is one of our member organizations, and they've taken the training in order to deliver that training across the province as well, whereas Women's Shelters Canada is doing the training nationally. Tell me a little bit about what this training involves. How does it work? Yeah, so it basically teaches employers what their legal obligations are in terms of supporting workers. So that depends on the provincial occupational health and safety standards, and also things like domestic violence leave. So in Nova Scotia, for example, people are allowed 3 days of paid leave, but then also up to 16 weeks of protected leave in a calendar year. So if they need to take time off, they will keep their jobs. But then the training also looks at how to recognize domestic violence in the workplace, how to respond appropriately, and then how to refer to specialized supports and resources.
Is that one of the concerns that have been raised, particularly at the employer level? Is obviously you're in contact with your employees on a regular basis. You work with them every single day, and maybe have an inkling something's wrong, but don't know how to recognize the signs, and what to do if you do in fact believe that there's a domestic violence situation happening.
Yeah, so I think there's sort of twofold, where sometimes people still think that this is a private issue and that it doesn't affect the workplace. But as you mentioned at the top of this segment, over 80% of people who experience domestic violence and are working feel that it negatively affects their work performance. And we also saw that over half said that an act of domestic violence happened at or near the workplace. And it is very much a workplace issue. So there's that piece, and then it's also, as you said, not knowing how to respond, not knowing what to do. So that's what the training really teaches, is how to sort of spot those signs, how to have conversations that don't, let's say, blame or force somebody to disclose, but sort of ask questions, open-ended questions such as, you seem a bit distracted, or you seem a bit worried when you're going home. Can we, what's going on? And then having those resources at hand to really to feel empowered to refer people to local resources.
I don't know if stigma is the right word, but as a victim of domestic violence and going to work, and some of the things that we highlighted at the top of the segment today, Kaitlin, it was, it's difficult from an employee level too, because you mentioned that most still believe that this is a private issue, and worry that if you make any kind of waves at work, then you're going to lose your job.
Yeah, so we did new research from December to January that showed that 1 in 3 employees have received a disclosure from a colleague about domestic violence. So we know that people are talking about it, but at the same time, only a third of people thought that employers were taking it seriously. So I think there's still that, not sure how to, as a person who's not, let's say, experiencing domestic violence, but thinks a colleague might be, you might be worried about bringing it up, or, as you say, making waves. And if you're the person who is experiencing domestic violence, you could be worried that your employer is going to be dismissive. They might not believe you. They might focus more on the issues that the violence is causing, and then, you don't get that promotion, or there's been cases of people getting fired, or, as we've talked about in the campaign, you don't get that reference letter when you do leave the job. So those are all concerns that we're trying to address.
You've created a website to help in this education effort.
Yes, so that is referher.ca, and that's where anyone can find sort of resources and more information about this, but employers can also directly sign up for the training through the website.
What is it? Is the training, is it an online course? Is it videos? How does it work?
So it's through, if you're in Nova Scotia, it would likely be through SANS, through the Transition Health Association there, and it can be virtual, it can be in person, or it can be in hybrid format. It's not like videos or course or online things. It's somebody kind of coming and doing, let's say, an hour and a half module with your employees, with management, with whoever you're thinking would be the best place to take the training.
And this is all free, correct?
Correct. It's all funded right now by the Federal Department of Women and Gender Equality Canada.
So it's giving up a little bit of your time, and at the end of the day, essentially could save a life.
Exactly. Save a life, but also just, economic security is vital for women who are experiencing violence, for anyone experiencing violence. Having that job, having that freedom to maybe, let's say, choose to leave a situation because you feel financially that you're able to is a huge thing.
Is this predominantly aimed at senior leaders, or is this geared for everybody in the workplace?
It's geared for everybody. So we're seeing some workers who want to take it, let's say, just for their management level or their HR level. But smaller organizations, for example, might take it for everybody, because as we see, any employee has an opportunity to intervene if they feel like a colleague is experiencing something. So it's useful for everybody to know, but it really depends on what the organization thinks is best for them.
Again, Kaitlin, if there are people out there that want to take part in this program, what's the best way that they can do that?
Going to the website, referher.ca is the best way. And then we also say if you or someone you know is experiencing violence, sheltersafe.ca will connect you with your local women's shelter and their 24/7 crisis line.
Kaitlin, appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
That's Kaitlin Geiger-Bardswich, the Director of Communications and Advocacy at Women's Shelters Canada. And a reminder, folks, if you are a victim of domestic violence or know somebody that is, 211 is the number to call. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you need help or information about domestic abuse, you can also call the province-wide 24-hour toll-free number at 1-855-225-0220. Again, 1-855-225-0220. 0220 1-855-225-0220. We're going to take a break and get an update on the news here on the other side of the update. We'll continue the show with something that is a bit puzzling to me, and that is a report, some new data that's suggesting that universities in Nova Scotia are having trouble filling vacancies in their residences. We know that there's a housing crunch in Nova Scotia. We know that it's extremely expensive to be a student and to try and find accommodations off campus here, particularly on the peninsula, but that would stretch, I would assume, right across much of the province. And yet universities are having trouble now filling residences, and that's one of the key performance indicators, my favorite word, KPIs, to receive some provincial funding these days from the provincial government. We'll have a conversation with the Executive Director of Students Nova Scotia and find out why students are avoiding residences. Brendan Roberts will be your guest after the update. All right, welcome back. You came across a story on the CBC website earlier on that kind of raised an eyebrow for me, and I'm wondering if it did the same for you. And the article reads this: that some Nova Scotia universities are facing a potential loss of hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding after failing to hit a provincially imposed target to fill campus residences to 95%. The universities, of course, breathing a sigh of relief after enough students filled those residences to meet that requirement. The vice president of students at St. FX says it's a big deal. That amount of revenue swing is a significant thing for any university, especially in these times. And that's a story in itself, that we're coupling residence capacity with funding for universities. And I understand why, because we're in this housing crunch. But the other side of that coin is why is it so difficult for universities to get to 95% capacity, given all the things that we've talked about here on this program for months and months and months, and that's the housing crunch and the cost of rent and living off campus can't be a cheaper alternative, or maybe it is. So we decided to go to the source, so to speak, on this, and welcome into the show today to tell us a little bit more from a student's perspective, the Executive Director of Students Nova Scotia. That's Brendan Roberts. Brendan, how are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. I guess that's the burning question, right? Is why is it so difficult for universities to fill those residence spaces?
Yeah, I think it's something that it's a really complex problem, and I'll be fully honest, I'm still in the process of learning kind of all the intricacies of it myself. But I think that while students are trying to, find housing and find affordable housing, there's so many other things that go into the decision to or to not live in residence. And I think that students are often disproportionately affected by the cost of living crisis and the housing crisis. And the way that university residence is set up right now with, typically how expensive it can be a really big barrier for a lot of students.
Is it more expensive to live in res than it is to live off campus?
I will say not necessarily everywhere, but I think especially in rural communities, and depending on the residence style that you live in, it can be. Absolutely. I think, for example, many more students nowadays are looking for, especially in their first year, single room dorms with kitchen options and things like that. And those, especially in our universities, which are, many of them are very, quite old, they're not really built for those needs. I think also the cost of meal plans, which are typically mandatory, especially for students in their first year, can be very expensive, costing between $4,000-$6,000 in some cases. And those are mandatory. So students, on top of having to pay a very high premium for living in residence, in some cases higher than what they might be able to find if they were living in a room in a house, for example, they're also expected to pay those really high meal plan costs, which just makes the price tag that much higher.
Brendan, it's been a minute since I was in post-secondary education, but I do remember vividly my time at college and university, and I remember dorm life was what's the way I should best describe this? A bit unique, perhaps, and can be a little bit overwhelming, so to speak. Is that factor in the decision making to live off campus at all?
I think so, and I think that I think there was a big shift in what students were looking for. Honestly, I think it was driven in part by the pandemic. I think that since then there's been sort of a rethinking in the type of living style that many students are looking for. Many students are looking for quieter options or options where they are able to make their own meals, and especially that's the case for I know folks like international students, many of whom struggle to find culturally relevant food options or options that meet dietary requirements in campus meal halls. So I think that's really driving a lot of this debate around whether residence is sort of a viable option to live in or not.
Brendan, I'm going to sound like the old guy on the front porch here, but in my day, residence meals were like a deep fried cheeseburger or a deep fried fish burger and French fries and some kind of soup. And you mentioned dietary requirements. I would imagine that those dining halls have gotten better, but maybe not there yet.
I'd say, and even talking to my parents, I'd say they've. It sounds like we're, worlds away from maybe what was there a decade or two ago. But I do think there is still a lot to go or a long way to go before, students are really able to fully consider it as an equal option to living off campus and to not having to have a meal plan. But yeah.
Brendan, this now will impact funding levels for some universities as the province has tied residence capacity to some of the funding levels. This also has to be a concern for your organization. Yeah,
definitely. It's again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but it's so complex and it's sometimes a bit hard to kind of explain why why we at Students NS are really concerned about these cutbacks. But I mean, you have, several universities who are in financially precarious situations to begin with. And, the provincial governments impose things like a tuition freeze, for example, for in-province students, which we were really excited to see in their recent agreements. But when you implement policy like that and don't increase the operating grant that universities are getting to, cover sort of the back end of that loss, there's essentially, universities need to look to other ways to fill that revenue loss. And, one of the ways that they could do that is maybe raising tuition for out-of-province students or international students who already pay a very high premium, or they can, increase revenue through other means, such as maybe like facility rentals or recreational facility uses, which are often, things that are used by communities, especially in our rural schools. So, it is quite tricky. And I think also, not offering the full, by incentivizing universities in a way that's kind of hanging a carrot in front of them, so to speak, without, truly providing collaborative support to address whether it's, the housing crisis or affordability challenges. I think we're going to see that maybe these policies don't work out as positively as maybe the government was hoping for.
Brendan, we have labor peace now at the universities, particularly here in HRM, and I know that was a concern for many students who were wondering if they're going to lose their year or anything else. Has that all kind of worked its way out, and are we back on schedule now?
I think for the most part, yes, but I think students are still students who have gone through a strike this year are. They're still trying to recover from that and move on. I think, any loss in class time is, a negative impact on students. But, we're hoping students are hopeful and they're looking forward to continuing the rest of their year out, I would say.
Brendan, last question with regards to housing with many students, many of your colleagues living off campus. Are they still finding it difficult to find appropriate accommodations outside of the residences?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's kind of a different case in rural Nova Scotia versus HRM in terms of what the actual problems are. For example, in HRM, there are slowly becoming the pressure in terms of housing options is getting a bit better. So there's more. A larger supply of housing. But what's really the problem now is that affordability piece. Those options, there's a lot of, I think we've all seen them, all the new developments that are being built around the city, which is really nice to see, but there's no affordable housing, which is what students are really looking for. So when you have all these, new builds and none of them are affordable, that's not really a viable option for students, unfortunately. And then in terms of rural, I think, I think to some degree there's similar challenges, but at the same time, I think that there's also just a general lack of housing supply, more so even than HRM in some cases.
Brendan, appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
That is Brendan Roberts. He is the executive director over there at Students Nova Scotia. It's residence has always been an interesting discussion. And many of you that have spent some time in post-secondary education will agree with me that residence isn't for everybody, right? It is. It's a unique living experience, and I'm sure it hasn't changed an awful lot since my day and since Vanessa's day. But and Vanessa's much younger than I am. That being said, it was. I guess the best way to describe it isn't for everyone. However, in a housing situation like we're in now, and it's something that I've called for a long time now, is that if we're looking to free up cheaper quote unquote apartments in HRM, then the universities need to do a better job housing their student body. But if the students don't want to take part in the meal plan or take part in that residence experience, because it can be a bit wild, then, what's the solution here? It seems to me that the universities need, and NSCC by extension, need to play a stronger role in housing their student bodies. But if the kids don't want to live there, or their parents don't want them to live there, and they don't want to fork out all that money for meal plans and so on and so forth, and now if that's going to impact their funding, feels like a big vicious circle, doesn't it? Going to take a break, and when we come back, I think that Vanessa's walking over to the prize cabinet. We're back after the break. Well, some big news just breaking here from the provincial government. They've announced, we've been talking about housing for the last 30 minutes or so, and it's appropriate that this was announced. But the province of Nova Scotia is changing their first-time home buyers program. The required down payment, 2% of the purchase price, which is less than half the usual minimum down payment. The province partnering with the Atlantic Central and credit unions across Nova Scotia to deliver this. They're calling it a pilot program as a way to help Nova Scotians overcome one of the barriers to buying a home. It's always been something that Clinton Wilkins has talked about here, and many guests that we've had on the program is the dream of home ownership in Nova Scotia is starting to fade because the average house price is continues to climb. Clinton will tell you that the kind of sweet spot for what is selling out there is about $600,000. You need to save whatever the bank said, 5.5% down payment on that kind of money. You can see that to save that kind of down payment is a tall task. That's why many young home buyers are now going to the bank of mom and dad to get that down payment, right? And certainly not sustainable. 2% much better than 5%, right? And that's going to open up the door to some additional people that are looking to buy a new home. But as is with all government programs, there's a series of strings attached. The first one is pretty standard: be a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, or an immigrant with a sponsorship letter from the Nova Scotia Provincial Immigration Program. That makes sense. Now you have to have a credit score of 630 or higher, which is I think that's just into the good range. So if your credit score's got to be 630, you have to pass the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corp, that CMHC stress test, to determine the maximum mortgage that you can carry. So you can't just go out now because the numbers have changed to your down payment and get something that's going to put you underwater and make you house poor, right? And you have to have, this is the one that is the question mark for me, you have to have a household income of $200,000 or less. Now, that's many of you out there today, right? I don't think that number is astronomical, but home ownership for people that are making $220,000 a year as a couple easier to attain than somebody who's making less than that. But those are the strings that are attached, at least the ones that the government is telling us about. There is a cap on the price for homes. And this is another question that I would have, is that the cap on the home in HRM and the municipality of East Hants is $570,000. So to be eligible for this program, you need to make as a household less than $200,000 a year. You got to pass the stress test, and the property that you're buying in HRM and East Hants has to be under $570,000. Outside of those two areas, the number's down a little bit as property values maybe are a little cheaper, and that's $500,000. So that out from the government today might be something that you want to talk about during the open hour, which we're going to do here in just a few moments' time. Elsewhere, we're talking about the parking ban today. And lo and behold, as I was literally speaking about it, the municipality posted that they are going to lift the overnight parking ban. My concern about this is that yesterday the municipality, very early on in the day, and it was in fact it was during the show, that they said they were going to maintain the parking ban yesterday. Well, I guess into early this morning. When I left, and again, didn't travel every street in HRM, didn't travel many streets, but the streets that I did travel were clear and black and right to the curb. And my street at home was clear and back and right to the curb, as were the side streets in my neighborhood. I think we understand why the parking bans are needed, right? I don't think any of us would be upset in doing our part to get our car out of the way of the snowplow when there's an active event or in the hours after the active event. But does it make sense to you that 2 days after the snow stopped, or a day and a half after the snow stopped, and it was 10 to 15 centimeters in HRM? Now, I know there were some areas like Austria Lake. Alistair told us that a weather station there reported 40 centimeters. So I get it that in some areas there was more snow, but you're also able to split this parking ban. There are two zones. There's a central zone and a non-central zone, right? So did we need to put that parking ban on? And the reason why I asked the question is that many of you park on the street, and when you have to move your vehicle off the street, it's a inconvenience, and in fact can and probably does cost you some dollars, right? Because a lot of people take to parking lots and to parking structures and those kind of things to get their car off the street so that they don't get that parking ticket. Then we hear the news that over the last couple of storms, the last month, I guess, because we've had 3 in a row, that the municipality has collected about $25,000 in fines. So is this becoming a new revenue stream for HRM? All questions that you may want to comment on when we open up those telephone lines right after the news here at the top of the hour. Before that, folks, the Halifax Mooseheads were on the road in Quebec this past weekend, and not the result, perhaps, that they were looking for, losing 2 of 3, but let's kind of put it into context. Played a couple of good hockey teams in there. So the Halifax Mooseheads are going to return to the friendly confines of our wonderful Scotiabank Centre, and they're going to try and continue to build on the momentum of their last game after coming off of a win, and try to put together a series of wins as we carry on and we move forward towards the playoffs in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Vanessa tells me that we have a pair of tickets, just single pair of tickets for the game, and that is tomorrow as we welcome the newest team in the Quebec Maritimes Junior Hockey League, and that is, of course, the Newfoundland Regiment. They'll be traveling here from the Rock to take on the Moose. 6:30 start at Scotiabank Arena. If you want to go, how about going on us? 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We'll take caller number 5. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We're back with the open hour after the update. Welcome back. Was waiting for the end of the song. This is the open hour. Your chance to talk about whatever it is on your mind as we do daily here on the program. The regular rules apply. This gets you an opportunity to chat about whatever it is on your mind, whatever it is that we've talked about before, perhaps, something that we haven't talked about before, and your opportunity to sound off on the issues of the day. First off, our congratulations to Al McMaster, who was the winner of the Mooseheads tickets. Enjoy them. It's a fun place to be at Scotiabank Centre. And Wednesday night games are fun, too, because we see maybe perhaps a little bit of a younger population at those games, and they tend to be a little more boisterous, if it's possible. And we go hard for the Mooseheads. That is for sure. There's lots to talk about today, folks. Both here in HRM, provincially, and across the country with the ongoing debate over separation in Alberta. I said yesterday on the show that, and I'll reiterate it here, just so I'm very clear, that I will never support breaking up our country. It's as long as there's a breath left in my body. But that being said, I respect the ability for people to ask the questions, right? It's how a free and open democracy works. If there's enough people in Alberta that are dissatisfied with that province's standing in Confederation, then they should have the opportunity to try and use the mechanisms that are available to them to have this through starts with a petition. I think they have to get almost 200,000 signatures, and then that will move it forward to a ballot question and a referendum, as we've seen in the past, and that process is currently underway. I perhaps am not as adamant against this than some people that live in that province, and one of them is, of course, the former premier of Alberta, and that's Jason Kenney, who was before a microphone yesterday and really didn't mince his words when it came to what he thought about the separatist movement in Alberta.
If these folks really hate Canada and they really adore the United States and Donald Trump, then there's a border crossing or two that they can take tomorrow. Go and claim asylum in the United States. Deal with ICE. Get the hell out of our country.
That from Premier Kenney in response to not only the separatist movement, but the talk, the allegations as of late that some of the leadership of this separatist movement in Alberta have had discussions with American officials, some going as far to say that some of these discussions have occurred with officials from the White House. And that, of course, should be raising alarm bells for many in this country. It's raising alarm bells for me. It's certainly raising alarm bells for Premier Kenney, as he didn't really. There's no room for interpretation in his words there. But if you remember back a couple of months ago, do you remember when Premier Doug Ford put out his now famous commercial in the United States? With the words of Ronald Reagan, suggesting that tariff regimes are not the way to go, and the reaction that commercial got from the Oval Office? Donald Trump stopped trade negotiations because of it. And the reason why he said that, citing that this was interfering with a Supreme Court decision that the highest court in the United States was reviewing the ability of President Trump to issue tariffs under some emergency program that he's been leveling on some Canadian goods. He stopped trade negotiations because of it. Now, Premier Kenney was suggesting that Mark Carney, the Prime Minister in the Liberal Party here, the Liberal government in Canada, should be more vocal in their opposition to these alleged meetings that are happening between the separatist movement in Alberta and the White House or the American government, suggesting that act is meddling in Canadian elections. And I was joking before I came back to the show here during the break for the news that it's not often that Premier Kenney and I have agreed on something. Well, I agree with Premier Kenney on this, that if this is in fact happening, if this movement is actively meeting with another government from another country, BC Premier David Eby called it treasonous. I think the Mark Carney government needs to address this and to be very, very frank on what they think about the Americans interfering in what will be or could be the electoral process in Canada. What's good for the goose, Donald? 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Let's go to the phone lines and welcome Sydney to the show. Sydney, how are you?
All right, how you been?
I'm okay. What's on your mind?
Well, I just got off with the CRA business line.
Okay.
And I don't know if anybody heard about this, but if you file a business return since January of 2024, in paper, the CRA are going to bill you $1,000+ per year.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
I actually have somebody that has an inactive business. They took out a business number, but they didn't. It's not active.
Right.
And they actually wanted to file inactive zero tax returns, and they wanted to. And I was going to paper file them for them, and they wanted $1,000. When I asked for the business address to send these for, they wanted $1,000 per tax return.
Wow. So and Sydney, if you file it electronically, do you avoid that fee?
Yes, but in order to do, I'm not sure yet, but I haven't. I don't know. There's a free zero tax return thing,
right?
But it's like $400 or $500 per year.
Wow.
Or for I know one company charges like $400 or $500 for a business return, just to like one of the companies regular tax return software program.
Right. Holy smokes, Sydney. Appreciate you bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, I thought I'd better get this out there, which is really stupid because if a company's inactive, why should you be having to pay to file your a zero tax return?
That makes sense to me. Sydney, appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye.
Take care. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Open hour continues after the break. All right, welcome back. Alberta separation certainly is a divisive issue. There is no doubt about that, and that is just within the borders of Alberta. And I know many Canadians, and I know many Maritimers, and I know many Nova Scotians have their thoughts on the issue, and that all pushed to the side, and I get it. And for instance, Mark writes, many provinces, including Nova Scotia, had better pray that Alberta doesn't separate and take their oil with them. We receive massive equalization transfers in the tunes of billions of dollars yearly. As much as people don't like to hear it, we're a have-not province and be in serious trouble if that happens. I agree with you, Mark. I think that many provinces, including our own, share in the bounty that is Alberta oil, and that is what's driving this. To be quite honest with you, my opinion is that Alberta is not happy with the way that they've been quote-unquote treated. And there has been this movement when I was posted there, and that's more than 5 years ago, about all of this. This is now coming to a head. But that's not the issue that I'm concerned about. I'm more concerned about the Americans interfering in this. And if this is true, if some of these organizers have had meetings with members of the U.S. administration and even the White House, does that not raise a concern with you? If Alberta wants to separate, then Albertans get to make that decision. But should there be interference from a foreign power in this? Absolutely. Absolutely not. I don't think I can be any more clear than that. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Hello, Jim.
Good morning, Dan. How you doing?
I'm okay. What's on your mind?
That's a great topic this morning. The reason I called is for that particular topic, and I have family in Alberta, and my wife is French-Canadian, and we went through 2 referendums during our lifetime so far,
right?
With wanting to leave Canada. And I remember one of the first referendums when President de Gaulle of France stood up there in Quebec and declared "Vive la Québec libre."
Well,
and what he meant was, you know what he said, the repercussions of that. So that was foreign interference on his part. The other part is that those individuals out west that are in favor of leaving Canada, they've got some nerve to call themselves Canadians when they go south to the border, and the Americans entertain them, and they're actively looking for that support, and they go and try to do it, through Trump in America, what have you. So I got no use for individuals like that still call themselves Canadians, reap the benefits of while they're here. So if they want to do it within the country, much like Quebec did, because we did have an opposition party one time that was the Separatist Party in Canada.
Well, technically, we still do have the Bloc, right? And then they certainly have a sway in Ottawa.
Bloc, yeah. It's just our system of government, and it works for us. We're not killing each other. But these guys that are going down to the States, and the States is welcoming them, particularly their ambassador in the U.S., and going down there and calling, I assume they don't call themselves Canadians. That would be an insult to everybody. But all your listeners and everybody else here, particularly fellow Nova Scotians, every chance you get a chance to get on your show, get on there and praise Canada, condemn these guys. I totally agree with Kenny, and I think he's 100% right, and I agree with you. You're 100% right when you say there should be no political interference from the U.S. at all.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Yeah, take care.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. I said it before, I'll say it again. I will never support breaking up this country until the day that I die. But I do support the ability for people to ask questions of governance in Canada and to challenge the political norms here. They have every right that any Canadian has to organize and to try and work within the rules that our Constitution lays out to have this debate, to generate these signatures, and if it gets to that point, to have a referendum. What I don't support and never will is a foreign power meddling in that. It's Canadian business. It's Alberta business. It ain't American business. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Hello, James.
Good morning. Hi. Quickly on a couple of topics. The easy one would be the parking ban. It's complicated, and yes, the city could certainly try to do better at publicizing its plans and explaining why it's put the ban in place.
Okay.
That's easy to do on the website, whatever. But I wanted to make sure you were aware, on my street last night, in the middle of the night, the plows went by and they increased the width of my street on Peninsular Halifax from 1.5 lanes to 2 lanes.
Right.
So that, in my view, that's a safety measure. That's not a convenience measure, because when it's 1.5, obviously you can't have traffic going in both directions, and it gets a little dicey at times. Anyway, so it is what it is, but certainly explaining what you're up to is a good idea. And then the American interference, the Alberta people, I followed this pretty closely there last week. Specifically, they met with representatives of the State Department. They may or may not have also met with representatives of the White House, but the part that made the news that I saw was the State Department. And the State Department spokespeople said, quote, or I not quote, but my quote, "We meet with civil society organizations from other countries all the time."
Yeah.
And both the State Department people and the Alberta people confirmed that one of the topics they discussed was the possibility of a very large loan from the United States government to this civil society organization from Alberta.
Yeah, exactly. Right? It's out of bounds. It's completely out of bounds. And if this is reversed, if the Department of Foreign Affairs in Canada takes a meeting with people from the United States who are not happy with the way that place is being governed, and we were talking about money, what would the reaction of the President of the United States be?
Send in the Marines.
Right. So, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, isn't it?
I think we violently agree on this one.
Appreciate the call, James.
You're welcome. Bye.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Donald Trump would lose his stuff if that ever happened and was made public. Let's grab one more call before the break. David, how are you?
Good. How are you, Dan?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Good. Just a couple things. Bike lanes. First, I just wanted to comment on that. I know there's been a lot of talk. City Council, they still want to put through the improved bike lanes throughout the city of Halifax. And they're using a statistic that bike counters, and they talked about something like 500,000 usages or something. And I just don't believe it. I say hogwash. I don't know what kind of system they have, but I've lived in Halifax for most of my life, and anecdotal evidence, driving around the city or walking around on the best summer day, any time of the year, there are no bikes in this city that would necessarily support the amount of money that the councillors want to put into it. So that's the first thing I have to say. And second thing on the Alberta thing, I think that we should focus more on what Mr. Carney can do, our Prime Minister, to fix the alienation that's happening in Alberta, and forget about Trump. Everybody's talking about Trump, and it's sort of deflecting from what our own responsibilities are here in Canada, and about our Prime Minister. He should be the guy that should be out there as the front man and trying to get Alberta back into the fold. And I'm just not hearing anything about that.
Fair point, David. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Open line will continue after the updates. Jason Kenney, not happy at all with the movement in Alberta, and particularly these meetings that the leaders of this separatist movement in Alberta have been having with the State Department and perhaps even the White House. Your thoughts? What should Mark Carney do on this? 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We're back after the update. All right, welcome back. Dan Olstrand here. This is the Open Hour, your chance to talk about whatever it is on your mind. The topic du jour is, of course, the question of American interference in the ongoing debate over separation in Alberta. Jason Kenney, the former premier of Alberta, sounding off and didn't mince words when he did so. I think it was on a radio program or a podcast. What he thought of the separatist movement in Alberta, and suggesting that members of the party that he was the leader of are misreading their constitution, the party's constitution, and suggesting that they would be a strong voice in a united Canada. And then Kenney went off and said that if essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, if you don't like it, then there's the door. And then called into question these meetings that the leaders of the separatist movement have been having, perhaps with the State Department, perhaps with the White House. And that leads me to my question today. Mark Carney is the Prime Minister of Canada and has not really been vocal on this file, nor is on the other side of the equation is Pierre Poilievre, to be honest. I mean, I mentioned it during the convention, which is easy in Calgary, right? But I think our political leadership should be standing up to this American interference, because what is it? There's nothing that it can be described as other than interference. If they're talking to the leaders of this party, and if there's talk of money coming north of the border, I can't find another word to describe it other than interfering in Canadian business. And I said before the break that if this was the absolute reverse, if Minnesota, where it's been a kind of a flashpoint as of late, decided that they didn't like the way that their their state was being handled or being dealt with in the union, and decided that they wanted to take a look at perhaps joining Canada or Maine or New Hampshire or Montana, which isn't likely, but it's on the border, or the state of Washington, and there was a sniff of a Canadian official meeting with those groups. What do you think the reaction would be from the President of the United States? I think we all know that answer, right? 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Hello, John.
How you doing today, Dan?
I'm all right. What's on your mind?
Doing a great job.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, you're welcome. I was talking to you yesterday about this. Dementia Don has already lost his stuff. He doesn't know what he's coming or going. He's just throwing out numbers constantly, and people just react to it. Quit reacting to it and just leave it alone. But when it comes to Alberta and them accessing and talking to them, these guys should be charged for treason, for getting involved and getting money. And I'd like to know where they would generate money in Alberta if they don't have resources, because the resources will revert back to federal ownership come the time when they want to try to separate. So I'd love to know where they're going to get the money to pay off any loan that the states give them. You know what I mean?
I hear you, but possession's
right?
Possession's 9/10 of the law, right, John?
Exactly.
So if you separate and you have the oil in your province, then it's the onus on the Canadian government to come and get it, right?
Right, absolutely. And all the transportation has to go through somewhere,
right?
Unless they send it straight down south.
And I'm not putting the horse before the cart here, but I would imagine would have been part of that discussion, right?
Exactly. But these three guys, right, and Carney should get more involved right now. He doesn't want to let this go and have it snowball. You know what I mean? Like,
I hear you.
Get some momentum behind it.
All right, John, appreciate it, sir.
Right, no problem, Dan. Have a good one.
You too. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We say hello to Ashley. Ashley, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Well, I was just calling in to weigh in. I totally agree. I mean, I think that more needs to be done to stop it. I don't like it. I agree that, Albertans, if they feel they want to separate, should have, go through the channels to do that. But I think some perspective on it is just that, we also know that it is pretty normal for separatists to speak to state departments, even with Quebec's referendums in the past, only in the sense that if you are going to separate, you want to know where can you get your stuff to market, who's going to make deals with you, and that thing. But obviously, in this context, it's not so cut and dry,
right?
And I do think it's treason and it's wrong. Per Mark Carney, though, I think personally, I'd love to see him, as he says, get the elbows up and just speak to this. I don't think it was good that the question came from reporters, not him getting in front of it.
Agreed.
But what we saw in Davos was kind of an example of how it's a tightrope. I mean, I think most Canadians said, his speech was perfect. We, thought we really stood behind it. It was elbows up. But then afterwards, it was a bit of, well, you did poke the bear and there's a consequence. And I think in all of this that there are consequences to saying something in the way it's said, and sometimes little reward. I mean, Donald Trump's going to do whatever he decides to do this morning, So at the end of the day, I think it's good to stand up and say something, but I think it does have to be calculated. And I think Mark Carney could do a real good job of keeping Canadians informed on his decision. I mean, he hasn't said something, so he did make a decision in my mind. He decided not to address it to this point. And I think he should just be more front with Canadians on why he's not saying things or what his plan is, so that maybe we can see that better rather than saying nothing.
Great points, Ashley. Appreciate the call.
Thank you.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. What about Pierre Poilievre on this one, folks? I think that Mr. Poilievre is in a very difficult position. We know that a significant portion of his base reside in that province. And I'm going to suggest that a good number of people that have been discussing separation from Canada are Poilievre's supporters, right? So it would be interesting to listen to Mr. Poilievre with the data that we know that, or the facts that we know that there were meetings. And to Ashley's point, I understand that. But if there's talk of money coming north, and if the White House is involved in this, then that's a whole different kettle of fish, is it not? It will be interesting to watch Mark Carney's reaction to this and Pierre Poilievre's reaction to this as the days and the weeks move forward here on this campaign to get enough signatures to make this a ballot question in Alberta. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with your calls in minutes. All right, welcome back. A few minutes left before the top of the hour. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Let's try to get to as many calls as we can, and we welcome Dave to the show. Dave, how are you?
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
My question to all this is, how did we get to this point in this country? Like, how did we get here in the first place? Now, in my opinion, we've had 10 years plus now, in my opinion, of liberal governance that has driven this country in the ground. Just go see where we are in the G7 stature. We're at the bottom in your cost of food, and we're just not progressing. We're actually regressing. So I think that has something to do with it. I think Alberta, folks in Alberta feel left out or cheated in some ways. They provide certainly the equalization payments to big time to Quebec. They're the big winners, and Nova Scotia and the have-not provinces. I hate saying that, but we are. And I think there's some unfairness that they're seeing, and they're driven to this point. Now, I don't agree with them heading south and talking to the White House or whatever. I don't agree with that whatsoever. But something has started this movement. And we are Dan, I don't know if you know this or not, we are a very, very divided country right now.
Right.
I mean, you look at the last election. The only reason that Mark Carney got in was because of the elbows up and smooth and what have you. But he was still part of the liberal, how should I say, part of the liberal package there that we took on Carney, and he was the economic advisor for Trudeau. And he was all part of it. And some people say globalists and what have you. There's a movement, whatever. So, to me, I think people are just fed up. We're, like I said, we're scared, we're angry, and we're strapped. And I think, Alberta is just, and don't forget, Quebec has been threatening separation as well until they rattle the chain and we give them more perks to keep them happy. So this is nothing new. I certainly don't agree with what they're doing, but I think we have to sort of say, how did we get here, Dan?
Well, I can tell you, Dave, that I was posted in Alberta in 1991, I think it was, maybe 92, and this talk was happening then. So I don't think it has anything to do with the Liberal or Conservative government in Ottawa. I think that to your point of our country being divided, I think that has a big part to play in it, and I think that
totally.
I think that given the economic situation that we're faced in this country and equalization payments, that has always been the issue. It's been the issue since Pierre Trudeau and the energy policy, right? So I don't think that Alberta discontent with the way that the money's handed out in Canada is a new thing. It's been around for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, but I think also Trudeau has shut the tap down on the industry out there, and now we're talking pipeline to get to BC, right? All of a sudden,
and then Mark Carney took over and opened the tap up again. So is really that an argument? Well,
good luck trying to get the pipe to BC, Dan. That's not going to happen. Do you think EV is going to allow that through his province and through native lands and whatever? That's not going to happen. It's much easier to drive a pipe down south. And Trump knows that, right? There's a lot of, and let's remember.
But Trump said he doesn't need Canada's oil anymore. He's got Venezuelan crude. So is there even a market there anymore?
There's always, and also needs the rare earth minerals as well. So having said that, now listen, Alberta also provided us folks out here in the Maritimes at one time, and Newfoundlanders, right? Remember Fort McMurray? People would go out there when there was nothing going on in this province at one time, and they would work out there and get good money.
For sure.
And then all of a sudden it just sort of came to a stop because of this green venture that Trudeau wanted to get into and what have you. And now we're scrambling. Dan. So I don't agree with it, no. But how did we get here?
Fair
How
point.
in the heck did this country is divided like none other? So Carney has a lot of work cut out for him, and he better get cracking.
Thanks,
Cheers, Dan.
Dave.
I
Have a
appreciate
good
you
one.
taking my call. Right.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. It goes back to the elder Trudeau and probably beyond that with Alberta's dissatisfaction with Ottawa. I think that that separatist movement has been around since then. It was there when I was posted there, and I know that many of you that were out working in Fort McMurray, as Dave said, would have felt it when you were there. I think that the divisiveness that is growing across the country has emboldened that movement. I think those that are strongly opposed to the way that Ottawa and Alberta deal with each other are striking when the iron is hot. I think they're seeing an opportunity. I don't think that it is because of the government that's currently sitting in Ottawa. This has been simmering for a long time. Let's go back to the phone lines. Where are we here? Let's welcome Sue to the program. Sue, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Oh, I was just listening to you talking about Alberta and treason and that. And, I'm not happy with the elections anymore because you vote, you hear the platform, you vote for the people that you think most aligns with your values and policy, but once they get in, it's like they all adopt the liberal agenda. Like I voted for Tim Houston, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, during COVID, like everything the federal government told him to do, he did, like lockdowns, and now we're being charged for climate change.
Well, Tim Houston wasn't premier during the lockdown, Sue. You're mistaken.
To me, there's no conservative representation in the provincial area and also in the federal. When you vote for them, after the fact that you vote for them, then you find out that they sign you up to the WHO, up to the World Economic Forum. Like, I didn't vote for these people to govern Canada. I voted in our elections for people to govern Canada that we elect, not for outsiders to come in and dictate policy.
All right, Sue, appreciate it.
Thank you.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-825. Lots to unpackage there with Sue. But the lockdowns were not instituted by Tim Houston. Those were Stephen McNeil that was the premier at the time and a completely different government. And now Tim Houston was elected and at the tail end of it, and some of those things were continuing during his tenure. But the lockdowns and so on and so forth that Sue was talking about, those were Stephen McNeil as premier of the province. Let's see if we can squeeze in a couple more here. Let's welcome Greg to the show. Greg, how are you?
How you doing? No, I want to just say that you're right. This thing about Alberta, that just didn't happen yesterday.
No,
that's
it's been going for a long time.
Years and years and years.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember back when Peter Lougheed, who was the premier back then.
Ralph Klein, that's my time, was where Ralph Klein was in office, and there was certainly a lot of discussion then.
Yeah, I mean, this is not happy. I mean, the big thing is they're upset with their money comes and it helps us down here, and I mean, okay, fine, we get it. But, you know, the biggest problem that they have is Ottawa telling them what they can and cannot do.
Yeah,
and I think that's probably getting long in the tooth, so to speak. So, but, you know, like you say, this didn't happen. I mean, I lived in Quebec for years. I voted in the first referendum in Quebec, 1980. And hold on to your shores here, boy. Legault has quit. Now, the Parti Québécois in Quebec are high in the polls. And they're looking like they're going to form the next government.
Right. So we may be having this discussion again soon, right?
Again, exactly. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, but the thing is, what people get upset with is that what Ottawa keeps telling them what they can and cannot do. And eventually that gets long in the tooth. And, you know, hopefully it doesn't happen. But, I mean, if anybody thinks this just happened, no, this has been going on for years and years.
Right. Greg, I appreciate it, sir.
Okay. Bye-bye.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. That is the number. We welcome Pat to the show. Pat, how are you?
Good morning, Pat. I've got one comment and then I have a question for you. You might be able to answer. I'm really impressed this morning the way most everybody is avoiding the word treason, because I don't think it amounts to that yet. But your interference in that, 100%.
Right.
Now, just because I don't know much about the Constitution in detail, wouldn't you think that even if they had the referendum and they won, that the Premier or the Prime Minister could just use the notwithstanding clause and veto it?
Boy, I'm not a constitutional scholar. Maybe we're gonna, that might be an interesting question. Maybe we'll reach out, Pat, to somebody who can know that question. I remember after the 91 referendum, or at least in the run-up to it, that there was a lot of discussion going back about what kind of percentage did you need? Did you need 50 plus 1%? Did you need to have 2/3 majority? And that question may still exist, but the notwithstanding clause, that's an interesting discussion point, I think.
Well, what I heard last night was they have to reach almost 200,000 names
to
get the referendum.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would do is I would either publish or save those names for future and deal with it. At least you know you have to deal with first if they do anything but what they're doing right now, which, is just interference, as you said, and maybe just causing an upset or divisiveness within the province. So keep up the good work.
Appreciate it, Pat.
Good talking points.
Have a good one. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. That's the number. A couple of emails that I want to get in before the top of the hour. One of your callers, this from Nick, says that was misleading. I believe if you go to any right-wing space online or watch any conservative post, you'll notice that an awful lot of articles from Republican-backed American-owned Post media, although our conservatives believe wholeheartedly that the boogeyman mainstream media is all left-wing and brainwashing people, I think it's quite the opposite. Post media pushing their propaganda is foreign interference, and we have perhaps to let it run wild for long enough. The separatists out west indeed are radical right, and if you see by how they open their arms to the U.S. so easily, they might be just getting compromised by foreign media. It's not helped either that Pierre Poilievre has seemingly turned Canada's conservatives into not only the opposition to the Liberal Party, but to the left-wing citizens as well. Just my opinion. That comes from Nick. Post media, particularly the National Post, has been slanted conservative since its inception. Nick, this isn't new. This isn't, I don't think, the American owners are forcing it upon them. I think they're doing well enough on their own to take the conservative side of the coin. It's been very much since day one for the National Post for that. My thanks to all of you. For those of you that I didn't get to on the phones, my apologies. We're going to do this again tomorrow. It's Wednesday, though. We're going to move it to noon to make way for Dr. John and house calls. So maybe we carry on the conversation. This separation issue certainly isn't going away anytime soon. And I look forward to your comments on that and the other topics of the day when we do the open hour tomorrow at noon. Don't forget, the Premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston, will be on the show on Wednesday at 11 o'clock. I hope that you stick around and are able to join that and have your questions ready. The Premier says he's here to take them, and we're going to get to as many of those as we can. Time to stop. Time to get an update on the news at noon. On the other side of it, switching gears a little bit, Artemis 2. Is this rocket going to be the solution to lunar travel? Time for Science Files. Dr. Rob Thacker's here. He's going to answer that and your questions as well. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We're back after the update. All right, welcome back as the gremlins appear to have returned to our system. Computers are wonderful things, as long as they're working properly. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. That is the number. Maybe it's the magnetic personality of our next guest, and that is Dr. Rob Thacker. You walked in, Rob, and things started crashing. Are you like a big magnet, or what is that?
There's actually a story along those lines. That the joke used to be, if you go back 80 years, that there was a theorist called Enrico Fermi. And the experimentalists would joke, all he would have to do would be to change trains in their town and things would start going wrong with their experiments.
Look out.
Right. So maybe not magnetic, but just the presence of a theorist supposedly makes experiments go wrong.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. It's been a busy week, particularly in the NASA world with weather and Artemis 2, and now I'm reading that it's been delayed yet again, and we're not even looking at February anymore.
Yeah, no. So the wet dress was initially pushed back a couple of days, but now they're looking like they've got a leak, and so they're pushing back potential launch dates into March. So it's not a huge surprise. People may remember with Artemis 1 that was postponed. So they always want to be careful with these things, and so in this particular case, I'm not all that surprised, if I'm honest.
What exactly is a wet dress rehearsal?
Oh, so that's when
they load all the fuel on it?
Exactement. So it's a dangerous thing to do. Like when you load up the rocket with all of the fuel, it's in a pretty dangerous state because you've basically got a bomb that's waiting to go off, basically. And so that's always something where there's only a very, very limited number of personnel around the tower. And so they take those, as you might expect, extremely seriously.
For those of us that don't have a clue what Artemis 2 means, Rob, what's the mission of this rocket?
Right. So the mission of Artemis 2 is the first trip around the moon. People are sort of like been saying going to the moon. It's not quite going to the moon. It's going past the moon, in fact. But this is really all about testing the Orion capsule. So Artemis 1 was also about testing the Orion capsule, but really with no one on board. Right. So now the next step is to test it with 4 people on board, seeing how it performs, how all the life support systems work, and so on. And as well, there's a little bit of other stuff going on. I believe there are some CubeSats going up with the mission as well. But this is really a test ahead of Artemis 3, which is the mission down to the surface. And Artemis 3, as the current mission design is really quite a bit more advanced than this. They'll have to dock near the moon to go down to the surface and so on. So that's a pretty different mission to this one.
The Orion capsule, how much, and this is probably will sound like a dumb question considering that the last lunar modules are 50 years old. How much has changed? Has the technology changed a lot?
Yeah, the technology's changed a huge amount. I mean, we've really gone from what would have been small-scale integration systems, as we called them back then. Now everything is basically done, with large-scale integration CPUs and so on. This is all much, much higher performance than the computational systems. In the actual engineering of the hardware of, say, life support, there's actually probably going to be quite a lot in common, right? Things might have changed in terms of like the design of the charcoal filters and things like that for getting rid of the CO2. But at the end of the day, basically, the engineering is going to be similar, but all of the computational side is much, much, much further on advanced. And to put this in context, if you look at the rocket engines on the SLS, those have a history going back to the space shuttle, right? So again, the engineering doesn't change all that fast, right? You might change things here and there a little bit, but the fundamentals of the physics don't change, so the engineering doesn't change quite as much.
Why do we still have to use essentially an unexploded bomb to get these things into orbit in 2026? We haven't developed enough or a propulsion system that can create enough thrust for that?
It's just the energy you need. Right. I mean, people might say, well, isn't a jet engine burning as well? So yes, it is. Right. So it's just that jet engines compared to rocket engines, a jet engine doesn't have the same incredible temperature change in the space of, say, 30 feet of piping that a rocket engine has. I mean, that's one of the challenges with rocket engines. You go from cryogenic fuel to something thousands of degrees with like a couple of pumps. That's making it sound really simple, right?
It's probably more than a couple in there, Rob.
Yeah. So okay, the whole turbo pump system and whatever. There's a lot of mixing going on as well, and so there is a lot of technology. Don't get me wrong. I mean, engineers have been working on these things for dozens of decades, and still, for very fundamental physics reasons, you can't make them as reliable as you can something like a jet engine. So we're looking at pushing rocket engine reliability up into the 4 nines regime, and jets are obviously in the 1 in a million regime. So there's still quite a significant difference in reliability.
Why do we need to go back to the moon?
Some people would say we don't. Right? Some people
would say...
Is it
just because we can?
The moon is a harsh environment. Right. So
it's dusty.
It's dusty. Lunar regolith is horrible material, right? And going back there is going to teach us quite a bit about dealing with that kind of nasty environment. Is Mars as bad as that? Probably not, right? But if we can go back to the moon and we can operate in that kind of environment, then in my opinion, we've probably learned everything we need to go to and at least operate on the surface of Mars or someone like that. So I actually think it's worthwhile to go back, do stuff that we haven't done before, literally try and inhabit up there for some time. I don't think there's a particularly strong economic argument for it. Like all of the space mining stuff tends to, as we've discussed many times on the program.
The space ladder, too. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that you can do on the moon, right? So you could have the so-called space elevator, I think we should call it. You could do that on the moon, but I don't think anyone will, right? Because if you were going to do it anywhere, you would probably want to do it on Mars, where it kind of makes sense. But as, again, we have talked about before, when these things break, the outcome is kind of catastrophic, right? And I think that alone tends to mean these things probably won't get built.
So is the Artemis missions, plural, is that the stepping stone in sending a human being to Mars? Is that kind of the progression?
It's certainly laying the foundation for that. Right. So one of the planned ideas with Artemis was to go out in missions out into deep space for a few weeks at a time, come back to the lunar gateway and just learn more and more about radiation effects on the human body in that area and so on. It's not clear what the status of those kind of missions is. Like Artemis is described up to Artemis 3. There are supposed to be more Artemis missions after that, but you're then getting into questions of what launch vehicle are they going to be using? All sorts of things like that. So it's not really clear where the whole program is going to go. There's still the lunar gateway as well, the idea of having this essentially space station around the moon.
Around or on the moon?
Well, around the moon. So the idea of the space station in the particular orbit they've talked about, a so-called halo orbit, is it will be a really good place not only to go off into space around the moon and go further out, you could also go down to the lunar surface from it as well. And that's really kind of the idea behind it in terms of being a multi-platform launch space station, for want of a better term.
Is it easier to dock on a space station that's orbiting a planet or on the surface of the planet? I would imagine the energy to get off the planet is kind of crazy.
You don't need too much energy to get off the surface of the moon. Like if anyone remembers the Apollo mission, the rocket that got it back up to the command module wasn't that big. Right, so you don't actually need too much energy to get off the surface of the moon. So that's not too much of an issue. And surface of the Earth, yes, right, but you've got a lot more gravity on the Earth you've got to escape from than you have on the moon. So that's not too bad. The challenge is literally going down to the moon. You've got to navigate everything. You're basically landing on the surface, which is not trivial to do, right? I wouldn't go so far as to say we've solved that problem, because anyone who's been following lunar landers over the past few years by different countries and different companies will know several of them haven't landed very well. Right. So docking is tricky, but I would kind of argue we've figured out the physics of that. It's more of an engineering problem, making sure the thrusters work perfectly and things like that.
Because we do it all the time with the International Space Station, right?
Yeah. I mean, we dock with the ISS all the time. Yeah.
Right. So I would imagine the technology would be the same.
Yep.
Interesting. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We're going to take a break. Dr. Rob's here to answer your science questions. Lines are wide open, 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We are back after the break. All right, welcome back. This is Science Files. He is Dr. Rob Thacker from St. Mary's University down there in the weeds of the peninsula. Can I say that? And he is
the South End is not the weeds.
Well,
of the peninsula.
it's the oldest part of this. Anyway, probably not the best descriptor to say the weeds, but down there in the south end of the peninsula is St. Mary's University.
There are a lot of very upset people down there.
The grass did get a little high on the campus a little bit this year, so maybe that's why I got the weeds analogy. But anyway, down there in the south end. My apologies to all of you before you start emailing. My apologies to you that live in the south end. You're not the weeds of the peninsula. Anyway, Dr. Rob, we were talking about Artemis before the break. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. Got an email question from Paul who writes, last week here on the program we learned why water freezes from the top to the bottom. Now his question is, why does frost freeze straight down? Is it the same idea? And then he goes on to with another statement here. It says, I'm told if you insulate the ground, frost can go down beside the insulation, but only beside it and not under the insulated part.
Oh, I see what they're saying. I mean, okay. So, yeah, that's okay. So it will go under the insulation, but it's going to go slowly under the insulation.
Right. That's why we cover our tomatoes when it's frost, right?
Yeah. So what you got to think about is when you put the insulation on the top of the ground, then you're providing a layer that's meaning the ground under the insulation is feeling a warmer temperature, effectively, right? And so if you then go to the edges, then if you want that freezing effect to sort of go underneath, it's only going to go as far under as it's going down, right? So that's going to be the main thing that happens.
The ground is an insulator, right?
So the ground is an insulator for sure. So it will freeze a little bit around the edges, but it's just not going to go that far, right? If you give it long enough, yes, it will freeze eventually, right? But I didn't know whether this was going to be a question about why we see sort of like straight line streaks of frost or something like that. And I think that's actually about, maybe that's about scratches and how water accumulates along scratches and so on. So that would be my guess.
Frost is a brilliant artist. Sometimes I'll get up in the morning. And it's it'll cover the hood of my truck, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one of my most retweeted photos back when I was active on social media was literally of like feathery appearances from frost, which is a combination, I presume, of the surface effects and then the way water tends to freeze with six-fold symmetry. And that just went crazy on social media. People loved it, retweeting it and so on. And it's amazing the structures that you see.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. Dr. Rob sent me this article from Science Daily, and it, I'm sure, will pique the interest of many here, as we are a province that's on the coast, and many of you have boats. Maybe you make your living on a boat. Maybe you work with a boat. Maybe you have a pleasure craft. But science is working on making it safer for people to get out on a boat, and we know that there was some allegations made 100 years ago about making ships to be unsinkable.
Yeah.
Which was proven to be false. You just ask the Titanic.
Yeah.
But now the University of Rochester is starting to work on a solution to puncture holes in ships.
Yeah, so this is really, really interesting. And in fact, I should do this pocket. Fascinating.
There you go.
And so what they've done is to do something that I wouldn't say this is totally new, but they've got a way of doing it on aluminium, or aluminum, as is said in North America, that I think is fairly sort of interesting and unique. So there's this, people may have heard of the lotus plant with lotus leaves, where the water will just bead up right on the surface, and that's what's called a hydrophobic surface. Water literally struggles to attach to it, right? And you can also look at things like diving beetles. They also have skin that's hydrophobic, and so when they dive, instead of the water just sort of like brushing off all of the air that's attached to them, they will actually have little pockets of air on them that they can actually use and breathe while they're underwater, right? And so these people at the University of Rochester, they've used this idea to literally create a surface on aluminum that is hydrophobic. And so when you then submerge that surface in water, you will have water bubbles that stick to it. So it keeps an element of buoyancy, right? And so they've done this on really quite small little aluminum tubes. And the thing is, if you look at the sort of like surface tension around them, you can see that it's like there's a lot of surface tension associated with all of the additional sort of structure from all of the air bubbles and so on. And on top of that, within the tube itself, you have additional air bubbles within there as well, adding more buoyancy. So it floats. Even when you drill holes in it, it still floats, right? So it's really, really clever. And so one of the things they did do was say, well, what happens if you sort of turn it up so it's pointing vertically, because that you might think, well, that would then make it sink. And so what they said was, well, why don't we put a divider in the middle and see what happens? And so they put a divider in the middle, and of course the air that was actually trapped ended up pooling in the middle, and it still didn't sink.
There you go.
Right? So this is really, really clever. Now, the only question marks for me about this is, what do you do in terms of the geometry? Like the way they've done it in tubes, I think there is a kind of specific thing about that geometry. Would they be putting a lot of these on the side of the ship or something? I don't know. It might be because they know how to etch the surface to make it hydrophobic. Would they do that over the hull or something like that? I don't know. It might make the ship a little bit unstable, actually. But no, I thought this was really, really cool. And I'd be super keen to see how this gets taken by naval designers and what they do with it.
You mentioned the diving beetle, and that's fascinating that they're able to do that. And you may have answered it when you started to talk about surface tension, but if the water doesn't react with the exoskeleton of the diving beetle, does that reduce drag when it tries to dive, or would, with the surface tension and those bubbles, would it make more difficult? I'm thinking from a submarine perspective.
So I actually do think that from that perspective there is more drag because you've got to get the water around the bubbles. Yeah. So there has to be more drag because the surface area, effectively what's moving through the water, has increased. So
it pays the price in efficiency getting to its target underwater, but is able to breathe and stay down there longer.
Exactly. It's able to stay down longer, and presumably that's a survival adaptation.
Right. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. So is the theory with this skin that they would put on ships, would it replace the hull, or would it be an additional safety measure? Would it be something, say, they glued onto the inside of the hull?
So I'm not actually sure, because I was wondering that myself. Like, if you look at the pictures that they have, you can tell, like, you can do. I'm not sure whether they use the polarization of the surface level of the water or not, but you can see there's a lot more tension in the water around these objects than if you just have something that's naturally buoyant within the water. So I think the main thing we'll see, first of all, is sort of they'll presumably trial floating platforms first. They'll make larger and larger platforms out of it, see what its overall behavior is in those kind of environments. Certainly you can imagine, I mean, for buoys, or buoys as I say, right? You can make those with this particular technology, and I would have thought that would be a really sensible thing to do, because you could make literally unsinkable buoys.
Right. So if they get whacked in a storm, they're still going to float.
They're still going to float. They're not going to go down, yeah. So that would be my guess of where they go first. But I wouldn't be surprised if you can scale this up to support pretty heavy loads at the end of the day.
So it would be like a membrane on maybe on the inside of the hull. So if the hull's breached, then this would protect it?
Well, that's a possibility too, right? But I got to think about what's going to happen in that scenario, because then you need to trap as much air as you can, because you sink, because you're literally filling air pockets with water. So that's going to be the main issue there.
902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We're going to take a break for the news. Dr. Rob's here to the top of the hour. If you have a science-related question, something that's been bothering you, or just a question you've always wondered about, he's here to do his very best to answer that. Again, 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We are back after the update. All right, welcome back. Science Files on a Tuesday afternoon from St. Mary's University is Dr. Rob Thacker, and he's here to answer your science questions. 902-405-6000 or 1-877-801-8255. Dr. Rob, let's go to the phones and welcome Carl to the show. Carl, how are you?
Not too bad. How you doing, guys?
Not too bad.
Good. Couple of quick questions for you, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
How does sound perform in space? Like, does it work? Like, could it be used as a propulsion once you're in space? And the other thing is when you're re-entering Earth's atmosphere, everything burns up. I take it that's because you're moving so fast and it's friction, whatever. Why can't we just slow down as we're re-entering?
Okay, sure.
So things don't burn up.
Thanks, Carl.
All right, so sound in space. That's a great question. So the honest answer is, and this is always something that I have to be very careful when I talk about this, because we do sometimes talk about sound waves moving in the interstellar medium, the space between stars, but that's not really like the sound that you and I know on an everyday basis. And in fact, that kind of sound, effectively because space is a vacuum, you don't hear sound in space. Like there's literally nothing for it to travel through, or there's not really nothing, but the density of atoms in space is so low that literally the sound that you and I are used to is not going to travel through that medium at all. So no, you're literally, if you're expecting to hear sounds in space, you can't. And it's kind of weird in that sense that if you explode something in space, you don't see anything until the material involved in the explosion actually hits you.
So no radio stations on the moon is what you're saying.
Oh, radio is fine. Right, radio waves will still go, right? So if you've got your radio in your little spacesuit, you're good to go. Right? But in terms of re-entering, yes, you've got it. So we see very, very hot material around things that are re-entering because they are moving very fast. And so to put this in perspective, could we slow things down? I mean, the classic example would be someone parachuting from space. Right, they would be comparatively slower. They're not coming in at an approach speed associated with, say, coming back to the Earth from the moon or something like that. So, yes, you could slow down, but you've probably guessed the reason why we don't do that is you would need an enormous amount of energy to do that. You would need essentially the same amount of energy to slow down and come through the atmosphere fairly slowly as you do to actually get out of the Earth's anyway, right? Because you're fighting to literally lose all of that energy as you come down, getting that energy back from gravitational energy. So the closest thing you can sort of see that is, how can I say, a controlled re-entry is probably what they do with SpaceX with landing boosters, right? So they land those, you use a fair amount of energy to slow them down because they're coming back at supersonic speeds, but they're not coming back at the same amount of speed if you would have if you were in orbit or coming back from the moon. So they've got less energy to shed.
Thanks, Carl. Hope that answered your question. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. So if, and I know it's not possible because we probably have great big helmets on, but if you were a football field length away from me on the moon, and I screamed out your name, would you hear me?
No. No, even though the moon has a tiny, tiny, tiny atmosphere, you still wouldn't hear anything.
So that sound pressure doesn't travel through the vacuum of space?
There's so little vacuum there, right? The sound is a compression wave through air, basically.
Right.
But, I mean, I shouldn't say that. For what we hear as sound, what we call a sound is a compression wave that goes through the air. But you can also send it along a string. Like anyone who's done the cans on the end of strings, you are sending the compression wave down the string when you do that, right? So you can actually have sound waves in other materials as well. And funnily enough, sound in a metal, say, travels a lot faster than sound in the air does, right? But in general, it needs a thing to travel through. And if you don't have the thing like air for it to travel through, it's not got anything that it can go through, so it can't go.
So does that create a communications issue for colonization, perhaps, on Mars?
Oh, yeah. It means you're all going to be using radios.
Right.
Right. So you'll be using radios or, you can use light, right? So you could stand there with your semaphore flags and do semaphore, right? But no one's going to do that.
No.
If you've got radio, of course.
Makes for a long talk show to start semaphore flagging all of the things I say every day.
See, as an ex-military person, you smile with that one.
See?
Yeah.
Well, that's, yes, more the Navy, but we won't get into that.
Yeah.
902-405-6000. Thanks, Carl. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. As you well know, Dr. Rob sends me stuff that he comes across during the week and vice versa, as they say. And this one maybe not the happiest of things and studies that Dr. Rob has sent me in the past, and many of you will be able to relate to this, however.
Yeah.
And that is when you lose a furry friend, let's say, a member of your family, a pet, a dog, a cat, maybe a bird, maybe a rabbit, maybe a fish. And if you've gone through that process, you know that grief can be equal to, and in some cases more than grief that you experience with the loss of a family member. And now there's some kind of data that backs that up, Rob.
Yeah, so this is a survey that was done in the UK, right, of about close to 1,000 people. So that's what we would call a pretty reasonable sample. Maybe you want a few 1,000 more. But in terms of being able to sort of spot trends, it's pretty good for that. And so this is looking at whether people have responses that are called prolonged grief disorder, PGD, which is a mental health condition, right, that's brought about by the death of a loved one, right? And so this is saying, well, if we look at what loved ones include, including pets, how many people seem to suffer from PGD associated with pets? And I'll give you the answer for pets first, and then I'll give you the numbers for, say, grandparents, siblings, or even a partner, right? Because that's actually quite interesting. And so for people losing a pet, about 7.5% of people who had lost pets met the diagnostic criteria for prolonged grief disorder, right? So 7.5%. For the death of a grandparent, it was 8.3%. So hardly any more, really, for the loss of a grandparent. And for the loss of a sibling, 8.9%.
A lot of people don't like their siblings.
Right? Well, possibly. that could actually, that kind of situation would play out in the statistics.
Right.
Let's be clear about that. But the incredible thing was losing a partner was only 9.1%. Right? And so where things did become sort of higher was either losing a parent or a child, right? Those are 11 or 21%, right? Losing a child, I think, is very traumatic for a number of reasons. And so really what the outcome of the research is if you have a policy around absences around grief, the psychologists are saying, look, the reality is people feel grief around their pets to quite a significant level, right? And I've certainly seen this in my own family. My elder sister, they had a dog who was a lovely dog, and then very unfortunately, my brother-in-law ran the dog over in the driveway, and they were both profoundly impacted by that. They were really sad. Obviously, my brother-in-law was extremely guilt-stricken by what had happened, and my sister was just completely upset about the whole situation, obviously. And so that really caused them quite some problem for several weeks, right? And so I've seen people have this really prolonged issue with losing a pet in my own life, so I'm not surprised to see this research.
You and I were chatting about this during the last break, Dr. Rob, and I think many of us listening today have gone through the loss of a pet, be it from, as a child or as an adult or as a family. And the instances that I have lost pets, I think were more compounded because in each of the situations I had to make the decision, right, to put my pet down. And so not only are you dealing with the grief, but that's not an easy decision to make.
No, it's not. I mean, you're taking responsibility. I mean, I think there are different ways you can look at that question, right, depending upon your philosophy of life. But there are sort of complications in all of this, which again, are going to play out in the statistics of the data. And another thing we talked about was that when I lost my own father, that's something that many people find difficult. For me, because my dad was suffering so much with the cancer that he had, I lost my dad, but in a way I was relieved for him to no longer be suffering. And so when he eventually passed, and I was, believe it or not, I had to travel home, so I was in the car when I got the phone call. I did feel this overwhelming sense of sadness, but I also felt this overwhelming sense of relief for him that his suffering had been ended. And that, in a weird way, that I'm not saying there's any kind of addition of feelings going on or anything like that, but it does change how you feel about it. And so I know that when we had our own cat put down, she wasn't in a good place as well. And for all of us, we were like, let's relieve her suffering, and felt relieved for that.
Right. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. We're going to take a break. You're listening to the Science Files on the Todd Veinotte Show. He's Dr. Rob Thacker. I'm Dan Alstrand. We're back in minutes. Minutes left here on Science Files. 902-405-6000, 1-877-801-8255. That is the telephone number. We were sitting here during the break discussing Elon Musk and his latest effort to, I think, make probably, if not one of the biggest companies in the world. And the news this morning, if you heard it, at least on our station, is that Mr. Musk is is planning to merge SpaceX with his AI company, as I understand it, Rob, and create this $1.5 billion conglomerate, Omnicorp. I don't know what you want to call it. The tech world is, I mean, we know it's on fire. I mean, just look at the stock prices for
1.5 trillion.
Trillion, my mistake.
Yeah.
Billions what he spends on pizza.
Billions, trillions, who cares?
All right, he spends $1 billion on pizza every year. That being said, the tech world is awash in cash, right? And the Nvidias of the world, the Amazons of the world,
There's been a lot of talk about that.
Teslas of the world. Are we in danger of seeing? And I know it's probably not going to be the same sort of fall, but we had the .com failure back then, and the bottom kind of fell out when we got to a saturation point, particularly with artificial intelligence. Rob, I know it's something that you study. Are we in danger of getting to a point where we just can't improve it anymore?
So this has been the subject of a lot of research, and so we've gone through. Most of the researchers agree we've gone through a period of literally making models bigger and bigger and bigger and making them better as a result of the training we've been doing. But that epoch, as it originally was, has stopped, and we've shifted into a new regime where people are trying to make sort of models more specialist, train them better, and actually improve that aspect of their training. But there's a number of people who are critical who say, look, there's a fair amount of evidence that we are reaching the limits of what particular large language models can do. And if you look at some of the quite highly respected people, like Yann LeCun, he'll literally come out and say, no, we're never going to get so-called artificial general intelligence from large language models, right? And he has his own idea for a different architecture and so on. And so there's a fair number of people who I would say don't necessarily believe that these large language models as they are now is the path towards creating artificial general intelligence. But there's a number of people who disagree with that, who are in spending lots of money trying to improve those models and get to that standard, although I will say it's not clear to me how we're actually going to measure that anyway. But there are still people who are investing a lot of money. What's his name? Ilya Kutseva and so on, his artificial superintelligence company and whatever, they're literally trying to do that in what they call an ethical way. I'm not sure that's even possible, right? But there's a lot of people who are spending money on traditional ways of doing it, and other people saying, no, it's not going to go that way. So are we reaching the limits? In some senses, yes, but in other ways, no, because there's going to be different and new algorithms that come along. The question will be how much they improve the technology it is right now.
It continues to improve, right? I mean, we're not there yet.
It's certainly improving. Like, one of the things that I've noticed improving is the quality of the code that these systems will create. And now I do think that is one thing where, as you create bigger and bigger models, because the sort of like the number of algorithms you can create with code is limited, right? And so if you ask it to create code that's already been created somewhere else, it's very, very good at doing that, and is very, very good at combining them now. That's improved quite a lot. So we are actually, I think, seeing significant improvements in the quality of the code that it generates. It's still not very good at creating something entirely new, right, for obvious reasons, because it's trained on other things. So it's not going to be able to create brand new things other than adapting other things and creating, I don't want to say mashups, because that's it's used sometimes positively, but it sort of like takes away from combining things in an intelligent way and creating new things from that, right? But it's still not truly creative in that sense, and it's difficult to see how you can make it become that way other than just having random new thoughts. That's always a possibility, of course.
Are you surprised that, when we were likely sitting in this very studio a couple of years ago, and we were talking about artificial intelligence, and we were talking about the rise of the machine and how this was going to completely change our economy and was going to replace people and replace a lot of jobs, and in 5 years the employment landscape was going to look completely different. We're a couple of years into that now. We've seen maybe a little bit of that, but at least speaking for me, maybe not as much as I had thought we were going to see.
So I think Okay, let's focus on the media space because that's something that's close to your heart.
Fair enough.
And so I think there is a real understanding that when it comes to performance, people want human performance. And I think that's starting to play out. Although people say, what about all of the AI actors and actresses that are being brought together and all of the AI songs? And I'm like, I think they're a novelty, right? And people are interested in novelty, right? I'm not honestly convinced that, bearing in mind a lot of people, even if they aren't performers themselves, they have an interest in the skill of performance. And so we're going to continue to see an interest in live performance regardless. That's going to be true, I think, for the longest time. Will we see more AI songwriting? Don't know, right? Again, I think there's a lot of interest in human stories. I'm not going to say that you can necessarily tell apart things that are created by a human from things that are created by AIs, because if you train AIs on works written by human authors, then they're very, very good at reproducing stuff that's written in the style of a given author, right? They've got to that point, right? But it's the human side of it. There's, I'm going to use a very long word, but verisimilitude, right? The sense of reality and importance in a given way of producing something, right? I think that's a key thing for human beings. And I think we're starting to see that.
I fell victim to AI myself, and I purchased a history book from Amazon. Didn't really pay too close attention to it. Was a subject matter that's not widely written about, and I saw, hey, there's a book, perfect. Click. In the box, off it came, until I got it, and there's no author on it, and all of the footnotes are websites. So when it comes to the writing space, I mean, I get stuff in my email box all the time. Hey, finish your novel in 5 minutes.
So this is the challenge, right? So this is what's called AI slop.
Yes.
Right, and it's everywhere. Like low quality AI stuff is. Is a burden on humanity, right? Because it's very low quality, and it basically at the moment is starting to push everything else out. I mean, there was a very cool experiment going on right now. I actually do think this is interesting, of having AI bots interacting on the equivalent of a social media, right? And a malt book, as it's called. And so that's been interesting. And what won't surprise anyone is AI agents don't tend to talk to one another very well. Right, so 93.5% of the posts are basically AI bots shouting to other AI bots.
It's kind of like the humans doing social media.
Well, it's true, but I mean, I would turn around and then say whatever the training set for that is, it's kind of obvious how things have worked out. In a way, right? I mean, I will say this. Social media, certainly something like X or Twitter, if you went back to 2014, there were many of us who were lamenting how Twitter was changing over the years. But some people may or may not remember, there was a Twitter account called People of Halifax, which was shared, and you would get on it, and then you would meet all of these people who'd been following it before. So you would make all of these new friends. That was awesome. That was like peak social media, peak everyone being sort of like, not necessarily supportive, but being interested in other people, wanting to learn different stories and interact.
Right, like-minded people gathering in a space, yes.
And that was really amazing. But that slowly disappeared over time as Twitter became about creating more interactions and so on. They changed all of the following technologies. And so 2017, 2018, you heard people lamenting for the Twitter of 2014, right? And here we are now. The
toxic soup that it is.
X is just not a good place to go if you want to have a reasonable interaction over something, in my opinion, right? Because you'll immediately get pile-ons if you say something that's even remotely sort of like on a hot topic in the media. And so it's just not a great space.
AI, it's here. But I think just to put a capper on my story, I think that when an organization like Amazon is selling a product that they're as a book, as a reference book, there has to be some way that they can identify it as being AI so they don't get caught like I did. I've learned now to watch very closely for authors.
Yeah.
Because AI books,
totally.
those generated books don't tend to have authors on them. Dr. Rob, thank you very much for all of your knowledge. Dr. Rob is here every Tuesday to answer your science-related questions. We're going to say adieu for the day today. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Get out there and enjoy Nova Scotia. It's a beautiful place to live. Be well, and remember, be kind to your AI bot and to everybody else. Cheers.